All set.
Good evening, everyone. This is Lori Charlton. It's March 24th, 2022, and I want to welcome everyone to the Board of Finance budget hearing. I'll call the meeting to order and ask that we all please rise and feel free to unmute yourselves while our colleague, Mr. DeWitt, leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. DeWitt. To the members of the public, this is the 5th budget hearing for the 2022-23 budget. Tonight, we'll be completing a review of the different departments included in the budget by covering a number of areas. First, Opeb, short for Other Post-Employment Benefits, which represents the cost of retiree healthcare coverage for town employees. Pension for those town employee populations who are eligible under collective bargaining agreements. Health and life insurance for active employees. Human resources, including HR administration and other areas they help manage, including workers' comp, insurance and claims, and risk management. Legal services, unemployment compensation, and lastly, contingency. As has been noted in previous meetings, the contingency in the budget is not simply a reserve for unknown items. Much of the account is devoted to estimates to retroactively settle labor contracts that are expired or will expire by year end, and for other performance-based pay increases that are not reflected in the detailed budget line items. Because some of the matters under discussion tonight are confidential, including personnel matters and pending litigation, they'll be covered under item 4 of the agenda, which is the executive session, and that portion of the meeting will be closed to the public. After tonight, we will have concluded our detailed walkthrough of the budget. This Saturday, March 26th, we'll have our public budget hearing. So I'll put in a final plug for that hearing, which will be devoted to hearing from residents on the budget. That will not be a town hall or an interactive Q&A format. It's really a chance for this board to listen to the public. It will take place in person at Fairfield Ludlow High School at 9:30 a.m. The agenda has been posted, and as noted in the agenda, public comment will be limited to approximately 3 minutes per person. Following the public hearing, this board will meet again on Monday of next week for final deliberations and any follow-up questions for the departments. And then a week from tonight, March 31st, we will vote. I think I can speak for my colleagues in saying we look forward to hearing from the public this Saturday. For those residents who can't make the hearing, you are encouraged, as always, to send your comments to the following email: bof@fairfieldct.org. If you do so, please include your name and address in your email. We will also welcome public comment during tonight's meeting. If you'd like to make a statement that's relevant to any of the items under discussion on tonight's agenda, please indicate so in the chat box. And to the extent anyone wishes to speak, you will be recognized at the times indicated on the agenda. And we ask that you limit your comments to approximately 2 minutes. So with that, we'll move on to item 3 of the agenda. The first item is response to emails, and as always, this space is reserved for addressing any emails or written testimony related to previous meetings that we received since we last met. I will note that we had some additional residents submit testimony advocating for restoration of the education budget that was approved by the Board of Education. I thank those residents for their advocacy and thank all residents who've taken the time to participate in this process by emailing their thoughts. With that, I will move to Opeb, which is within Department 1310 on page 228 of the budget book. I want to give a bit of background on this item for the benefit of the public and perhaps our newer board members. First, the amounts in the budget related to Opeb represent the actuarially determined employer contribution, or ADEC for short. And that is, again, the actuarially determined amount that's necessary to fund the Opeb trust to pay for future benefits. Unlike pension, where we get an annual valuation done, for Opeb, we get the actuarial valuation done every 2 years. And that was done last year. So the actuarial report this board reviewed last year for Opeb covered the ADEC for both last year's budget and the budget we're reviewing tonight. The second background item I want to know is that the town changed its actuarial service provider since last year. The OPEB report from last year that we're using for this budget was prepared by H&H, our former actuary. They no longer work with the town, so they're not here with us tonight, but the OPEB reports they prepared and that we reviewed as a board last year are in the posted meeting backup. Within those reports, on page 3 of the posted backup for the town and on page 27 for police and fire, you'll see the ADEC numbers from the actuary that were used in this year's budget. I'll also note that the town number in the H&H report on page 3 of the backup is $4,246,850, and in the budget book, that number is split between the town, the ECC, and the WPCA, and you can see that split on page 232 of the budget book. The police and fire amount from the H&H report from last year, again, page 27 of the posted backup, in the amount of $5,596,727 agrees directly to the budget book. So with that background, if there are any questions from the board on OPEB, we can direct them to Mr. Schmidt. Questions from the board? Okay, terrific. All right, with that, we'll move on to pension, which is also in Department 1310 on page 228 of the budget book. The posted backup for this item begins on page 47, and some excerpts from that backup are also included in the budget book beginning on page 230. I want to welcome Jen Castellano from Milliman, the town's new actuarial services provider, to walk us through a presentation that her firm has prepared on pension numbers. And Ms. Castellano, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. If you just bear with me for a minute, I can share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
We can.
Okay.
If Ms. Castellano,
Yes.
if you hit that little thing that says display settings,
Display settings.
top of your screen to the left,
Yes.
click that and
Swap.
hit swap.
Thank you. Is that better now? You're seeing not the presenter view, you're seeing the full slides now?
We did, and then we didn't. Try one more time. I think you might have
One more
double clicked it.
Yeah, you just
Sorry.
click it once. No, you had it.
Okay, let me try again. Apologize, I'm not used to WebEx. Swap. Is that better?
Keeps defaulting back for some reason.
Try one more time, maybe hold it for a second.
It's sharing to the wrong screen of mine, I believe. That's what I think is going on. And I can't. All right, let me try something else. Let me stop sharing for a second. I apologize.
No, that's okay. We've gotten this in advance, so if worse comes to worse, we can look
If
at our.
everyone, yeah, I guess if everyone has the slides in front of them, I can just kind of refer to them on screen.
Yeah, that's fine. If you just
verbally,
want to
but-
refer to maybe page numbers in the
Sure.
presentation, that'll work. Okay.
Sure, okay. Okay.
Chair,
Yes.
this is Jared. We could share our screen that has the backup if you want us to do that.
Yeah, that'd be terrific, Jared. Thank you.
Yeah, could you put it in, you put the USB in? One second.
Which one?
The updated backup. Yep, that guy. Microsoft. Just hit Microsoft Edge, yeah.
There we go.
Which page is it?
Starts on page 3.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. This one is on page 47. My apologies.
There we go.
There we go.
Wonderful, thank you. So good evening. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. My name is Jen Castellano. I'm the new actuary for the town of Fairfield. And here in this next several slides, I'll be going over the pension valuations performed as of July 1st, 2021. You can skip over to slide 3. Before I get into the numbers and the media things, I just want to give up some quick background and some information to set the table. As we mentioned, we perform annual valuations for the pension plans each year. We collect the census data as of July 1st. We use that data to calculate the liability as of today of the future benefits that are promised to members. Then we look at the investment performance for the past year, and we put those two together and determine the plan's funded status. This funded status will change depending on how the population changes and how assets perform from year to year, and how the demographics and experience of the plans compare to our assumptions year over year. We monitor those trends. We discuss with the town whether or not any assumption changes need to be addressed as part of our process. But once we've calculated the liability, we put that together with the assets, and we use that to determine the actuarially determined contribution, which the town then funds into the trust. On the next page, just some quick terminology. I won't spend too much time on this, but it's important to understand the terminology to understand how the calculations are done. First is the accrued liability. This is the value of benefits that were earned in past years. So this is what members have earned today, up to date. The actuarial value of assets is equal to a phase-in of gains and losses of the market value assets over a 5-year period. So in any given year, your market value of assets may go up or down, have good returns, bad returns. For purposes of calculating the funding requirements, we smooth those investment gains and losses over a 5-year period to help reduce volatility in the contributions going forward. The unfunded accrued liability is the difference between the actuarial value of assets and the accrued liability. It's the portion of the liability that has not been funded by contributions yet. The past service cost is the amortization payment that the town makes to pay down the unfunded accrued liability. Currently, we're at a 20-year period, and it's a declining period. Each year it declines by 1. The normal cost is the cost of benefits earned in the upcoming year. So it's what we expect members to earn up in this next year. We take that and we net it out by expected member contributions. Expected member contributions reduces the normal cost dollar for dollar. And then we adjust that upwards for any expected administrative expenses that we expect to be paid out of the plan's trust. And we put all these things together and we come up with the actuarially determined contribution. It's the sum of the normal cost, the past service cost, and adjusted for a slight amount of interest to take into account the difference in timing between when we're calculating the numbers and when the contribution is actually made. So here we have a summary of the plan's population over the last 5 years. We break down the population into 3 main groups. First, we have our active members. These are the employees who are still currently working for the town. We have terminated vested members who are employees who are no longer working for the town. They've terminated service, but have not yet started to collect their benefits. And then we have members in pay status. And these are former employees who have started to collect a monthly benefit from the plan. Now, on the left side of the page, you can see that the town plan, the members in pay status is steadily growing and the active members is steadily declining. That is because the town plan has been closed to new hires for some years now. So we'll continue to see that kind of trend as the active population shrinks, and the retiree population will continue to grow and this plan become much more mature over time. Whereas on the police and fire side, onto the right side of the page, you can see in the shaded, in the purple area, that the active population has stayed fairly constant year over year. That is because that plan is still open to new hires. New hires are allowed to still enter the plan. So as people terminate and retire, they're replaced with new hires. On this slide, this is another way of looking at the active population. It's a distribution of the age and service of the active members. Each box has a shading to it. The darker the shading of the box, the higher the concentration of the members in that particular group. So on the town side, you can see, as I mentioned just a minute ago, that the town plan is maturing and aging. You can see the concentration of members is right in that bottom middle section. People that are 55 and over and 15 plus years of service. So there is a significant number of town employees who are eligible to retire as of the most recent valuation date, and that will continue to increase as time goes on, as this plan becomes more mature. On the right-hand side, for the police and fire plan, you can see that the distribution is much more spread out. There's a chunk of younger, shorter service people, and then there's also a chunk of older, longer service people. So it's much more spread out because this plan is still open to new hires, and I don't anticipate that dynamic will change much over the coming years. On to the next slide. So we just looked at the demographics of the population. Next, we're going to look at the plan's assets. On this slide, I have 2 sets of graphs. One is the market value of assets on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we have the actuarial value of assets. You can see on the left-hand side, the market value of assets jumped up quite significantly in the last year, and that is primarily because the plan's investment return for fiscal year ending 2021 was very strong, returned over 26% for the year. So you can see that in the market value of assets, that it jumped up significantly. However, on the actuarial value of assets over on the right-hand side, you see a much more smoother, gradual increase. And that's because of the mechanism of only recognizing investment gains and losses over a 5-year period. So there was a significant investment gain during fiscal year 21, but we're only recognizing 20% of that this year, and we'll defer the other 80% to future years and recognize an additional 20% each year over the next 5 years. So because of that, you can see that the actual value of assets, it's still trending up, similar to the market value, but it's just much more smooth. And again, this is another graph just looking at the another way to illustrate the relationship between the market value of assets and the actuarial value of assets. The dark green boxes represent the returns on the market value basis over the last 5 years, and you can see they're kind of been all over the place. You see the 26% return in this past year. The lighter green solid line represents the returns on an actuarial value basis. So you can see on an actuarial value, much less volatility year over year, and the assets return are more in line with expectation. Even with the smoothing, we still had a solid, almost 10% return on actual value basis in the last year. On this slide, we looked at the demographics. Now we look at the assets, and now we're going to look at the plan's funded status. So on the bottom left, it's the accrued liability. So this is the liability of the plan as of the valuation date, as of each valuation date over the last 5 years. You can see a steady increase in the liability year over year. That is because there's still members actively accruing and benefits are growing. So we would expect the liability to continue to grow as a result. In the top right-hand corner of the page, we can see the funded ratio. And this is the ratio of the plan's assets as they relate to the plan's liability. For the town plan in the blue line, you can see that the funded ratio has increased over the last year from 2020 to 2021. And there's 2 reasons for that. One being the strong investment returns. The second being there were some liability gains due to more deaths than expected in the population. So as members pass away, the liabilities for those retirees is released from the plan and increases the funded ratio as a result. So there was good demographic experience with respect to the liability on the town side, increasing the funding ratio. Now on the police and fire side, you see that it's kind of stayed level, dropped a little bit from 84% to 83%. There were, again, some nice investment gains, but those gains were almost completely and entirely offset by liability losses due to members retiring much earlier than was expected based on the actuarial assumptions that were in place for the July 1st, 2020 valuation. So those things combined helped somewhat wore away at the funded ratio for the police and fire plan. So putting that all together, we come up with the actuarially determined contribution. Here is a 5-year graph of the actuarially determined contribution. And if you go to the far right, you can see for the town plan, the actuarially determined contribution actually dropped by about $500,000 from $5.6 million to $5.1 million for fiscal year ending 2023. Conversely, on the police and fire side, you see that the actuarially determined contribution has increased by about $700,000. So the gains on the town side that caused the funded ratio to increase translates into a lower contribution. And the losses for the police and fire plan has translated into a higher contribution. This next slide just looks at how we come up with the interest rate assumption. This year, we lowered the interest rate assumption from 7% to 6.9%. And in order to determine an interest rate assumption, what we do is we look at the plan's investment allocation and how the plan is invested. And it's diversified in a variety of different asset classes, as you can see in the top right-hand graph. We have allocation to various different types of assets. Each type of asset class has a different measure of expected return and riskiness associated with it. So some have higher returns and higher risks. Some have lower returns, lower risk. It kind of floats all over the board. We take a look at the assets as a whole and come up with an expected return for the entire portfolio. And that's that little black dot in the middle of that top right-hand graph. On the bottom graph, what we do is we take we take a look at a long time frame for the expected returns. So in any given year, the investment return can range from a very high number to a very low number. There's lots of volatility in the market, as we know. We've seen it in recent weeks. But as we look at longer and longer periods, the high years and the low years start to balance each other out, and they tend to converge on what we call the 50th percentile or the median return. And you can see in the bottom graph as we get to a longer time horizon, 30 years, that range has tightened. And based on our capital market assumptions as of June 30th, 2021, and the plan's allocation at that point in time, our expectation of the plan's long-term rate of return is about 6.1%. So so as a result, we've reduced the interest rate assumption to 6.9 this year, and we'll continue to work with the town on gradually reducing that interest rate assumption going forward. This slide is just is it provided to give some expectation as to where we can where we expect the actuarially determined contributions to go over the next 20 years. For both graphs, the bars, so the first year is the dark green shaded bar, that's the current year. And then the hollow white shaded bars are the expected actuarially determined contributions if all assumptions come true going forward. So if demographic experience is exactly as we expect it to be, if the plan returns 6.9% per year as assumed, we can expect the contributions to look like that. Now, if the actual returns are lower than the expected returns, as you remember on the slide before, I said our expectation is about 6.1% per year, but we're assuming 6.9. So it's to the extent that the plans consistently underperform the assumption, you'll see some upward pressure on the contributions, and those are represented in the dashed and dotted lines. So you'll see over time the contributions will be much higher because pension plans are a premise of pay now or pay more later. So to the extent you under contribute now because the interest rate assumption is not in line with the expectation, you'll have to contribute more to make up the difference in the future. And these next two slides summarize everything I've just talked about, but represented in the nitty-gritty details of the numbers for those that are interested in looking at all those numbers. I'm not going to go into all the details. I just want to point out one main change we made this year, other than the interest rate assumption from prior years. In that far right-hand column, is we've changed the methodology for calculating the interest component of the actuarially determined contribution. Our predecessors used a different methodology that we didn't feel gave enough adjustment for the timing difference between the valuation date and when the contribution is made. So we've adjusted that. What we have changed it to is to reflect a full year of interest, because the valuation date is July 1st, 2021, but this is developing a contribution for fiscal year 22-23. So it's a full year later that the contributions are actually going to be made. So we've made that adjustment to be more in line with expectation. And though that's all I have, and I'm open to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Castellano. Jared, would you mind taking that slide down for us? Okay, thank you. Questions from the board? Mr. Stark.
Could either Jared or the people at Milliman remind me why the police ADEC is going down so substantially over the next few years?
That's because the plan is expected to become 100% funded about 5 or 6 years out. And once it reaches that point, remember that the components of the ADEC are the past service cost, which is the pay down of the unfunded liability, the normal cost, and then that small interest component. Once the unfunded liability goes to zero, The contribution is essentially just paying the normal cost. So you're just paying the value of benefits that are earned each year. So that's why you see that.
And the graph you showed us models it to going to absolute zero, not to like 95% funded or something like that, right?
Right now, 100% funded.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Other questions from the board? Mr. Walsh.
Thank you for being here, Ms. Castellano. And your assumption, especially the graphs at the end, which shows how our ADAC will kind of be going down over time, especially on the town side, because can't add anybody else into the plan, obviously. So the number of people in the plan will be going down. But both for that and the police and fire are all on assumptions that the contracts stay exactly as they are, correct? Because
Correct.
if something changed in the police and fire in one day, there was nobody added to that, then we'd start seeing the same effect as we did on the town employee side, correct?
That is correct.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Ms. LeClaire. Mary, we can't hear you. All right, does anyone have a question while Ms. LeClaire is getting up and running? Mr. Walsh?
Sure. And Ms. Castellano, on that same graph that I was talking at the end of your presentation, at some point, I know we have some younger people who squeaked in and are still going to be up, but at some point that's going to go down to zero, correct? As we get out to 2050, because people will eventually retire and there'll be nobody in the town side system if the
Yes.
contract stays the same, correct?
On the town side, eventually that will go to zero, yes.
Okay, because
Once there's no more active employees left in the plan.
It seems to be the last number of years, it stays at like 400,000. It's kind of like.
Yeah, so there's probably some fairly young people with a small amount of normal costs still left in the plan at that point in time.
Okay.
But I imagine if we extended it another 5 years or so, you'd see it probably go to zero.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Ms. LeClaire?
Hi, sorry about that. My question relates to the change in methodology. So how did that change our pension contribution? Did it decrease what we would have had to pay this year, or did it increase what we would have had to pay?
It increased what you would have had to pay because it adjusts for a longer time period of interest to account for the gap, the timing lag between the valuation date and the time the contribution is actually made.
Okay. And then last night when we listened to the police department budget, we have an unprecedented amount of vacancies in our police department right now. So there's quite a few new employees coming on board. How will that affect future pension contributions?
To the extent the active population grows from where it currently is, it will increase the liability, increase the contribution. It'll take some time to come to fruition though, because newer employees have a lower cost early on in their career. It's not until they get further on into their career that they become more substantial in cost.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LeClaire. And just as a follow-up, so Ms. Castellano, to Ms. LeClaire's question about the change in methodology and how much it made the contribution increase by, that's represented by the last two columns on page 14 of your presentation. Is that the
Correct.
4818 versus the 5062, right?
Yes, and that's for the town plan, and then the police and fire plan is on the subsequent page, the 6430 to 6669.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Curley.
Yeah, just a quick question, clarification, really. You made reference to rate of return a couple of times. You made reference to interest rate. The charts on pages 14 and 15 reference interest rate. Just for clarification's sake, when you're referring to interest rate, you're really talking about the expected rate of return, correct?
Correct. Yeah, with public funded pension plans, the interest rate and the expected rate of return are one and the same.
Yeah, understood. I just found that the terminology is an interest rate a little less than clear, but just wanted to clarify. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Curley. Other questions, Mr. Testani?
Thank you. Good evening. How are you? I just have a similar question to what Ms. LeClaire was referring to. It's probably an anomaly because it was a big topic of conversation with the police were the retirees and the vacancies. But I'm just curious on the retiree piece of it. There seemed to be a fairly significant uptick this year, and I know the chief sort of speculated that there could be, you know, significantly more. Would there have to be, you know, something really abnormal for it to affect this? Or I'm just trying to get an idea of how perhaps a sudden spike in retirees would affect the rate, what we're talking about.
So the sudden spike in retirees, though, you're right, there were a significant number of retirees this year and many more than we expected based on the assumptions and past experience. And that did produce a what we call a liability loss. So it made the liability increase more than we expected it to increase, which in turn increased the contribution this year. That's the main reason why the police and fire contribution went up so significant, so much more than went up, whereas the town side it did not, because that we didn't see that happen on the town plan. Now, because there's a kind of a gap and there's some vacancies, the active members are probably, the active population is probably a little lower than it typically would be in the future, and maybe this upcoming year when we do the valuations. So that component of the contribution, the normal cost, the value of benefits earned by active employees is probably a little lower than it would have been otherwise. So that helped to kind of mitigate a little bit, but the losses from those people retiring definitely drove up the liability and drove up the cost as a result. So it was a one-time thing. It's been recognized. Assuming things return back to normal, there should be nothing else. There should be no other future, nothing else driving up the costs. But if it persists, then maybe we need to reevaluate the assumptions.
Well, let me ask you, I understand what you're saying with regard to reevaluating the assumptions. Is there any kind of contingency built in case there is, let's say next year, 20 police retire, you know, just to use a real, not, you know, something really unusual. How would that be, or would it just be the contributions would increase?
Yeah, it's that there's nothing built into the funding mechanism currently. You know, it produces a what we call a liability loss, and which will increase the unfunded liability, which is amortized over a 20-year period. So it is smoothed out over time.
Okay.
Sort of extending that period, which I wouldn't recommend doing. There's not much else you can do at this point in time. As the plan, you know, the plan's pretty well funded at 83%. As it becomes more and more well funded, we can start looking at some mitigation strategies that could help to offset any unforeseen future events.
Okay. That's great. Thank you so much. Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Mr. Stark.
Ms. Castellano, just looking at the plan assets slide, let's just use town as an example. Market value of assets went up almost 46 million year on year. Actuarial went up almost 14 million year on year. And the note above says you're realizing the market value gain over 5 years, which is entirely clear to me. And just help me understand how you work. If something happened next year to erase a considerable portion of last year's gain, would you? How do you deal with it? Do you essentially net it out of last year's gain, or do you continue to recognize last year's gain over 5 years and then make some further adjustment thereafter. I mean, it probably lands you in the same place, but I'm just curious how you work it.
Yeah, we generally would just continue to recognize last year's gain, and then that if next year's potential loss, we'd slowly recognize that as well. So we wouldn't recognize all of that. We'd only recognize 20% of it.
Everything rolls off.
Yeah, so that all kind of rolls off, and that's what helps keep it, you know, fairly smooth rather than bouncing around as much.
Got it. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stark. Other questions from the board? I just have a quick question, Ms. Castellano. So we changed the discount rate here, or the interest rate, to 6.9%. Were there other changes in assumptions relative to inflation or anything else notable that impacted the liability?
No,
No. Okay.
no.
Okay. And so for the police and retirement issue. So the reason that gets more expensive when they retire early is because we're going to be paying retirement benefits for a longer period of time. I guess at the same time, they also stop accruing additional years of service, but why doesn't that offset? Are they sort of topped off at that point anyway? And
Well, yeah, so, you know, they're collecting benefits for a longer period of time. Often they're eligible for an unreduced benefit at that point in time when they've gone. So it's not actuarially equivalent, so to speak. Yes, they're not going to accrue further benefits, but built into the liability is an expectation that they will retire based on a certain schedule. And to the extent they don't retire based on the schedule that we expect, then it does produce a gain or a loss. If they retire earlier than we expect, then it's going to produce a loss. If they retired later than we expected and people stayed working for longer and longer, even though they're accruing a benefit, it would produce a gain because the town's not responsible for paying them anything.
Yep. And so the expectation on retirements is age-based. Is that how you?
I believe it's age and service based, and quite honestly, in my opinion, the retirement assumption does need to be reevaluated, especially given that there's recent changes to the plan benefit structure for police and fire based on data hires, different tiers of benefits and different retirement eligibilities, but yet everybody has the same assumption. And to me, that needs to be reevaluated. And we are scheduled to do an experience study this year and look at the assumptions holistically for both plans and come up with our best estimate of what future assumptions should be. So hopefully that exercise will help to prevent future gains and losses going forward.
Okay, and I can appreciate that, and I understand that you have to do the experience study, but am I taking from your comments that you think when those assumptions are reevaluated, that would produce an increase in the annual cost?
It's possible. Some assumptions may, but there might be other assumptions that may help to reduce the costs. You know, inflation's a big topic right now. We have to look at the inflation assumption and how that relates to salary increases and other components. And there's no way of really knowing until we've gone through the exercise and see. There's just too many moving parts. But yeah, in my experience studies tend to increase the liability of plans rather than decrease liabilities.
Got it. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that. Other questions from the board? Okay. Well, seeing none, thank you, Ms. Castellano. We really appreciate you being here. Welcome to Fairfield. Glad to have you on board on the team. And if we don't see you before, we'll probably see you next year at this time.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care.
Right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. We are going to now move to Department 1320, Active Employee Benefits. And that starts on page 66 of the budget book. I do want to note that the health insurance numbers that are reflected in the budget book have been updated, and the updated analysis is in the posted backup on begins on page 62. So we do have representatives from Aon here tonight to walk through the updated projections. And I want to welcome, I think they're all here, or Joel Chamberlain, Tom DeCona, and Carlton Lindgren. So welcome, and I will turn it over to you.
Carlton's, he's on mute.
That's better, huh?
Yep.
Sorry. We don't have the book in front of us that you're looking at, but I assume what was sent to you was the 6-page document that we sent over to the town.
Yes, that is correct.
Is
It's so
that
again,
correct? Okay.
yeah, so for the benefit of the board, and the posted backup that's on page 62. Go ahead.
Okay. So the first page of the document we sent over, we're going to talk to you about the 22-23 fiscal budget for the active population. So the first page of that document outlines the active medical, prescription, and dental historical claims for the past, I think it's 15 months. Okay, so that's the basis of what we use to project forward to fiscal 22-23 to determine what your costs are going to be. So if you look at that document on the bottom right, the column that says, or the line that says latest 12 months, it's 11,821,000. So that's the claim base that we're going to use to project forward to develop the overall cost. So does anybody have any questions on the historical claim information? Okay, you'll notice there is a column there for a COVID adjustment. We've made no COVID adjustments in the prior 12 months of claims. If we were looking at this last year, there was a relatively significant adjustment that we had to make because some of the months of claims were suppressed, quite a bit. We went back to our actuaries and they helped us figure out if you unsuppressed that month, what would a normal month of Fairfield claims look like? And that was the basis for projecting forward for 21-22. So we've not made any adjustment this year going forward. Okay. The next page is just the historical headcounts that go along with those claims. So these are the headcounts that develop those claim numbers. Okay. Questions on that page?
Nope.
Okay. All righty. The next page is the large claim data. Because you're self-funded and have purchased stop loss coverage. Stop loss is an insured product that allows a self-insured client to protect themselves against significant large claim activity. So in this case, the individual stop loss limit is $150,000. So any claim between 7/1 and 7/1 of any given year, the town of Fairfield is only responsible for $150,000 for any member. Anything in excess of $150,000 gets paid by the stop loss vendor. And in this case, it's Anthem. Okay, so over that past 12 months of claim experience that we use to project forward, those were gross claim numbers. We then have to take out any claims that are in excess of that $150,000. And if you look on the right-hand side, the very last column on the right, well, I mean, this shows all of the folks that had claims in excess of $75,000 in that 12-month period. But that last column shows the claims that we're taking out of the claim base before we project forward to 22-23, because they're not your responsibility, they're the responsibility of Anthem. Okay? Questions there?
Not yet.
Okay. So the next page outlines the fees that you pay to Anthem. It's the top part is the medical administration. That's to adjudicate the claims, to manage the network, to keep the lights on, and so forth. computers and so forth. The middle section is the stop loss. That's the protection that we just talked about. It obviously comes at a cost, and we've outlined the current fees are in kind of the middle section, and the proposed fees are on the right. So, and they are just that, proposed. We don't have the renewal yet for 7/1/2022 from Anthem. So we put in what we think a reasonable increase would be above and beyond what you paid in 2021. Okay, so in this case, 2% to the admin fees and 15% to the individual stop loss. Okay, oh, and yeah, and 2% to the dental fee as well, sorry. Mr. Walsh?
Hi, Carlton. Just a
Hi,
quick
how are you?
question. Just before we get to the next page, I just wanted to bring this up. So the total stop loss coverage cost was $1.4 million approximately. Is that correct?
In the year that we're currently in, it would be close to 1.3, 1.277. It's projected to be 1.469, right?
The amount of benefit we've gotten out of that is how much? Like that, where
Well,
the coverage, the claim against that policy
Right.
have been in the 700s?
So if we looked at 21, 22, we think you're going to pay about $1.3 million in premium for that coverage, and you will have gotten about $750,000 worth of benefit.
Didn't work this year, but I believe in other years you've told us that we've really benefited from having that stop loss, correct?
Yeah, I've been working on the Fairfield account since 2007. If I went back and did that analysis for every year, you'd still be way ahead.
Way ahead, right?
Way
Okay.
ahead.
Okay, I'm just checking. I appreciate you stopping.
It has turned in the last couple of years, and that's a good thing, right? Because your large claim activity is down. We could look at raising the individual stop loss limit from 150 to something higher. That gives you some relief on the premium paid, but it does involve some risk, right? Because if you raise it from 150 to 175, you're taking on an additional $25,000 of liability for each person that might, go beyond that 150. So,
Carlton, do you think some of that, I don't know what you call it in your industry, but our use of that policy, the stop loss policy, has been lower because of COVID?
I'm sure it has. Just because of the suppression of claims would also mean that some large claimants were suppressed as well. But, to the extent that if, these are usually, cancer-like conditions, and that, doesn't get suppressed. I would say maybe somebody being diagnosed with cancer or something like that may have been delayed because of COVID, but I'm not completely sure that I would say that the stop loss claims have been suppressed due to COVID. I'm sure they have been to some degree. I'm not sure, we understand, at least at this point, to what degree they would have been.
In your industry, when they're talking about stop loss, do they think stop loss is going to have larger claims because of the suppression of claims during COVID? Undiagnosed things that have probably potentially gotten worse or moved to a different stage because people weren't seeing a doctor during COVID.
Yeah, we know from looking at data that there have been a lot of undiagnosed cancers that will end up being larger claims down the road. Absolutely, yeah. And quite frankly, the bounce back effect. People are having elective surgeries that were put off. They're starting to have those now, and they can run, in excess of $150,000 as well.
Thank you, Carlton, for your knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
And if I could just kind of tack on to the Carlton's answer, the other thing that is emerging kind of broadly in the marketplace, like you mentioned, the cancers that went undiagnosed and now are diagnosed at a further along stage. That's one. There's another example is chronic conditions, heart diseases, and diabetes, and things that have been not as well managed due to staying home, and therefore a greater prevalence of those turning into these catastrophic types of claims, heart attacks, for example.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next page is actually the calculation of the cost. So in years past, I have just gone down the medical column quickly and shown you how the math works, and it's the exact same math, if you will, for the prescription and for the dental. So if you want, I'll do that again this year. Yeah, good. So the first line is the latest 12 months of paid claims, gross paid claims. So that includes claims that are in excess of that individual stop loss limit. And then we take out the 745,000, gives you about 8.5 million. We then have to trend those claims forward from the experience period that we're using all the way to fiscal year 22 to 23 for you. And in this case, that's 16 months. So at an annual rate, and trend in layman's terms is medical inflation, right? So if it's 6 months annually, over that 16-month period, it's 8.1%. So we bump the claims up by the 8.1%, that gets you 9,221,000. We divide it by the head counts that developed those claims, that's the 455, gives you 20,256 on a per capita basis. And then we project that forward for how many lives we think there will be in place during fiscal 22 to 23. And that's just based on the latest month of information that we have. Now, I've been speaking with Frank a little bit. He told me that there were going to be some additions, I think 11 or 12 people hired by the town. So this doesn't take that into consideration. We did that in a different document. So that 20,256,000 times the 459 gets you the 9,000,300. We didn't have to make any claim adjustments this year. You add the admin, the network access fees, and the stop loss, gives you the 11,088,000. You add those totals up across the board, your new total is 13,904,000. And that's basically an 11.1% increase over the premium rates times the head counts from the prior year. Questions there? There's a lot of numbers on these pages, so.
Questions from the board? Ms. Marmion? No? Okay. Mr. Walsh?
Carlton, if you just explain to me, I understand what the trend factor is, the 8.1% basically.
Yeah.
For under the medical. Explain to me again the annual trend on top of that.
It's no, the 8.1 is a function of the annual trend. Right? So,
okay.
Yeah, if we're going to take your claims and trend them 6% annually, that's for 12 months. But because we have to trend them longer than 12 months, 16 months, that 6 gets converted to 8.1%.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Other questions from the board?
And again, that 13,904,000 is a gross number. Well,
Yeah.
Gross in terms of it doesn't have employee contributions taken out of that.
Okay, and that's actually a good segue. Mr. Schmidt, are you on?
I am.
No.
Okay, do you want to maybe walk the board through the, how this updated analysis changes the numbers in the budget? I don't know if you want to put that sheet up or not, the updated sheet, and maybe you can show the comparison to what we've just heard and what was in the budget book.
Yeah, Frank's gonna cover it, and we're gonna, put the sheet on. We'll share the sheet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Page, Jackie, it's, 68.
68?
Yep. 68 of the PDF.
There we go.
Good evening. So this sheet is kind of what I call the allocation sheet. And so the numbers derived here for lives or for the number of people to get an allocation between each fund, I use our budget numbers, not the lives numbers that they have on the Aon sheet. And I do that because while Aon, breaks it out by maybe service area, you could say, it doesn't split it out by fund. And it also doesn't split it out by union. And the union piece is important because I need to know how to net employee contributions. So basically, I take that total number, I add, and Aon and I have been back and forth with the cost per new employee. It's about $30,000. I add the new employees into the number. The cost for the new employees, I also net out what their contributions would be based on the union contract that they would come in under. And that's how I develop the numbers for each of these funds. There's also some HSA employer contribution, which is mainly for THEA employees.
Frank, can you just,
Sure, go ahead.
as you're speaking to the numbers, can you just reference the numbers you're speaking to on this chart as you go through them?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'll focus on the general fund, and if anybody has any questions, they could just let me know. The gross healthcare active employees, that is the projection from Aon based on an allocation of our total general fund employees as a percentage of total town employees among these three funds. And that is their gross premiums plus any of the new people that would be working in the general fund. Those employee contributions, the $2 million, that's what they would net out based on the contract. That's what they would contribute towards premiums every paycheck, essentially. And then you have the 11 million, which is with that netted out. And then the 123,000 and 36,000 are what are added back in. And like I said, the health savings account employer contribution is mainly THEA employees, and the out-of-plan stipends are those employees that defer to use our plan already have insurance. They get a stipend out of that. And so that's what gets you to the total for the general fund of 11.2 million. I did include a notation at the bottom left of the page, and this is speaking to the general fund only. But with the new numbers from Aon, it increased the general fund healthcare number by about 337,000. And so that was the increase for the general fund. The other funds would be also impacted a little bit. In the ECC fund, I think it was about 4,000, would the health insurance number would need to be increased from 491,000 to probably about 495,000. And that would trickle down to the general fund in a domino effect way, because the general fund would have to essentially, it would cover that gap. So there's that, just the 5,000 in the ECC, and the remainder of the total change goes to the WPCA.
Okay. Okay, do any, yeah, maybe just take that slide down for a moment. Just want to see if any board members have questions on this. Mr. Stark?
Well, why is that 14 million in the right-hand column different than what's in the budget proposal from a few weeks ago of 13.9 million? I'm confused.
Why is because the projection from Aon went up, And
Since
so
you
we
put out
need
the
to show
budget?
that.
Yes.
Oh, okay, got it, okay. All right, so you're showing the increase in the gross healthcare active EE in percentage terms, right? But are you, how much is the employee contribution going up in percentage terms?
I don't know the exact dollar amount. It would be a proportional increase because the percentages are fixed based on the contract. And the amount of contribution would differ per each contract because the percentages aren't all the same.
Right, and I don't
I'd
want
have
to
to-
mess around with your contract negotiations, so I'll be deliberately vague. You're making assumption. Oh, this is hard to do without being too specific, but I'll try. Are you making an assumption that the employee portion remains constant with the current or expired contracts?
Yeah, the assumption is that their percentage would remain the same. Correct.
Okay, cool. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Other questions from the board? Mr. Curley?
Yeah, just a clarifying question. So this page 68 from tonight's backup that you just walked us through, thank you. That was very informative. I just want to make sure I am correct. This is based on February 2022 data. In our budget book, page 67, looks like the same page, but it is dated. This was based on November 2021 data. Just want to confirm that this page that you took us through tonight replaces page 67 in our budget book, and the increase of I think it was 336,902 is a little less, but consistent with what the first select woman alerted us to at the start of this budget hearing process, where she said the town was going to go up by roughly 400,000. I just want to make sure we're talking about the same things.
Yes, correct. And the total change is closer to 400,000, but if you're just looking at the general fund, it's just the roughly 337,000.
Right. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, other questions from the board? All right. Seeing none, I think we are.
Madam Chair, I just have a quick general question. I'm not sure if it's
Go ahead.
to be now or later. I'm just curious. This may not be a question necessarily for Ann, maybe more for Jared, but my previous experience was in health insurances. So has the town evaluated self-insurance versus being fully insured? How often does that get evaluated? That's one. Two, are there other, I mean, I understand, look, the whole plan seems very reasonable in today's healthcare world, especially. I'm just curious, has there been other providers that have been evaluated recently as well? Thank you.
When Jim Hasselkamp comes on, he actually may be able to give some more insight on this, but my understanding is that one of the contracts has a provision that makes it more difficult to look at providers, and so that kind of constrains what we can do as far as shopping around. And so, to my knowledge, there hasn't been, I'm sure it's been evaluated to some degree, but like I said, our hands are kind of tied by one of those contracts, and that may be something that Jim Hasselkamp may be better off talking about than me or Jared. Yeah, and I see Mr. Hasselkamp on the screen now. I'm just out of my follow-up on that. What about the evaluation of fully insured versus self-insured? In my experience is self-insured is usually a better financial incentive for, an employer the size of the town of Fairfield. So I'm curious if that's been evaluated as well.
So, I mean, I'll just speak to a couple issues, but the town is self-insured now.
Right, I understand.
So, back a few years ago when the federal government changed a lot of the healthcare plans and taxes in particular and fees, it was even more of an incentive to go to self-insured. Okay. So there really hasn't been an evaluation to go back to a fully insured product, right, because I'm pretty sure that's going to go costly the other way
Oh, I got you.
because of
Okay.
some of the taxes. I will defer my answer on the why we haven't bid the coverage to the executive session that we're going to have, I believe, because I can certainly discuss that issue because it relates to one of the contracts, one of the contract negotiations. I think it makes sense I can certainly address that in that session if you'd like.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it.
I might add too that taxes and risk charges that are included on a fully insured arrangement that are not on a self-insured arrangement generally add up to somewhere between 6 and 7% of the cost. So that would be added to a fully insured plan.
Right. Okay. Makes sense. Thank you. Appreciate the info. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Testani. Any other questions on this? Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here with us and walking us through this.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Take care.
Okay, we are going to move on to Department 1330, Human Resources, which is on page 71 of the budget book. There are a few different sections of this budget, including HR operations, insurance and claims, and workers' comp. Mr. Hazelkamp, I'll turn it over to you to, review this budget in whatever order you'd like, or call on any of your colleagues to assist you. Mr. Hazelkamp, just as an FYI, your screen is blurred. I'm not sure if you have something over your camera, but
Yeah, somebody said it's blurred background. I have no idea how to undo it. Sorry.
we'll deal with your shadow, but go ahead.
I apologize for that.
No worries.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll start with HR operations. There were a series of changes to the department in the context of reorganization effort that would hopefully provide a more modern HR department. Brenda had requested that I come up with a series of structures for the HR department, which I did. Then there was discussions about how those would operate. And at the end of the day, the proposal that's in front of you is one of the options that we proposed. It really, it does a couple things. It shifts the risk management function, which you likely have heard that we've eliminated the risk management position. It'll be shifted to really the assistant director of HR and some of the administrative support staff, because large parts of that job are administrative. I actually contacted a couple towns, and a couple other towns similar size to us really have paralegals that handle a lot of that claims. And that was part of that discussion. So the restructuring, excuse me, basically keeps the structure for the benefits and for the director. It adds an assistant director that would cover the risk management functions, employee relations, and some of the training. And then it adds an HR generalist, which would focus primarily on general HR functions, which really in some sense are lacking in the department right now. I think that the part of the discussion that's come out of the task force, I know I was involved in some discussions with a couple of folks on that. There was a part-time position added to the budget, which is to assist in recruitment and affirmative action efforts. And that position's function would be to help, I think, with outreach and diversification efforts that really, to a large extent, don't exist right now. The police and fire departments, because they do their own, do some outreach that we don't get involved in. But this position would be to assist those efforts.
I'm sorry,
that-
Mr. Hazelkamp, when you refer to the task force, you're referring to the Racial Equity and Justice Task Force?
I am, sorry. Yes, that is.
In Leftwoods. Thank you. Okay, just clarifying.
I mean, that's the overview of the restructuring of the department. And I can certainly, there's other changes in the budget, but I probably should, I can focus on that and then go through the other changes in my operational budget. Really, the only other sort of cost driver in the rest of the whole budget is a purchase for some software that currently is being used by the police department. It's called Power DMS. And it really, it provides a level of policy management and communications management to the staff that we currently don't have. I had demoed their software a couple of years ago when I first got here. I saw what they used it for, and I thought that it was the single biggest weakness on the town side, which is our lack of policies and accountability for those policies over time. This system tracks all of that. It's a pretty neat piece of system. It roughly is about $20,000, which is what the delta is between the current software IT line item and the 71 and change that's in the rest of that budget line. So that's HR operations. I can keep going. Why don't we just break there, and then if anybody has any questions about the HR operations, I can answer those.
Okay. Questions so far from the board?
Excuse me.
Mr. Walsh?
Good evening, Mr. Hasselkamp. Thanks for being here. I saw that we got rid of the risk manager. Explain to me how that's going to be managed now, risk management? Can be outsourced?
Sure. I think, my assessment since I have arrived was that the position was not a full-time position. I tried to get it to evolve into some other things, and that didn't really work out. So the decision was to basically take the same headcount and the responsibilities for the risk management function would be shifted to the assistant director, and he or she would have broader responsibilities to the department beyond just the sole risk management function. So that's how that transitions. I've unfortunately had to take it over for the last month, so I have a pretty good sense, and I had a good sense beforehand as to what requirements are for the position. And I just don't, it wasn't a full-time position before Mr. Egan got there. It was part-time under prior administrations. It sort of evolved to full-time before I got there. And my thought processes was that we have many more needs in the department that could be handled by expanding the role of that position and rolling it under the assistant director.
Okay. Yeah, I think the previous person in that position did more than just risk management. It seemed that, I think that was Kennelly.
Yeah, she was in charge of the pension administration, which that got shifted to the benefits manager at some point. So there's been a lot of moving parts in the department over the years. So.
Okay, and you mentioned the new software. There's, I guess, a piece of software either we purchased or we talked about, I don't know, last year or something. I just wanted to ask you about and whether it's been, are we using it? We were supposed to spend some money on some type of system where employees had to check in, punch in, do some type of computerized system. Is that correct?
I believe you're talking about a time and attendance system.
Yes.
Yep.
How is that system working?
We do not have that system. That system, I've requested that project be shifted to the finance department. I have some issues about whether that can be accomplished without making major changes to the finance and HR systems as they currently sit. So it hasn't gone away. It's just been shifted for someone else to shepherd through. The money is still there. It's just not in my budget anymore. I don't know where I don't know where it landed.
Was that a budgeted item, the time and attendance system, or is that something we bonded for? I can't recall what that was.
Yeah, I know Jared's on the phone somewhere, but I'm almost positive it was budgeted. I just don't know where it was budgeted. It's not.
I think, yeah, I think it was budgeted 2 years ago, Mr. Walsh, as I recall, and I believe it was carried over as an appropriation because it didn't get done the first year it was budgeted. So it still sounds like it's still out there.
It is. This is Jared. It is still budgeted. Yes.
All right, Jared, are we still
And
planning on using it?
Yeah, we don't have it yet, but we are planning to, I'm going to evaluate it this summer with my staff.
Mr. Hazelkamp, you said that at the time it was going to save us a lot of money. So we're not been saving, I guess, that money. This is not
So can I just jump in for a minute,
Yep.
Jim? The first year we were hoping to get it set up. Obviously, COVID hit us, and all bets were off. We were doing other things. Once Mr. Hazelkamp took the time to really review how our systems were working here, he realized it was going to be a much bigger lift, much heavier lift than just getting the system, plugging it in, because there are so many different moving parts and departments work different and payroll and all these, and it would take a couple of hours for him to explain it to you, but it was a lot more complicated than because of the way our protocols and policies were in place in the town currently. So Jim worked really hard to get there, but obviously we had a lot of things happening in town. We did BRIP, we did all these things. So he has transferred it up to finance because they would be very integral in being part of this transfer because payroll is very connected to it and it's very, it's sensitive. So it has to have contracts punched into it. So somebody takes, a certain amount of time and understands, and it's complicated, but we definitely, this is a priority and it is something I'm really hoping we're going to be able to, finance is going to be able to get this analytical stuff done over the summer after the budget season's over, and we could get moving with it, because I really think it would be beneficial once those sort of kinks are worked out and we can plug into it.
Okay, so you think that it's probably going to carry over one more year till after like July 1st, and then you guys are going to look at that?
Yes.
Okay, and we still think it's going to save the town money, correct?
I'll speak to that. I don't know if I think save money is a relative term. I think that what we gain is where we're getting beat out of time. So there's an argument that we're in some circumstance we gain accountability, and that has a financial impact. I wouldn't say that it saves money in one sense. It saves lost time in some sense, which I think is valuable. Look, I think the system is critical to straightening out parts of the town that have issues. I just think that the challenge is going to be that the current structure that we have requires us to redo some of the payroll HR functions before we can put a time collection system in.
How are we being beat out of time? To use
just accountability for people.
Could there also be accountability where it's going to cost us money because people stay for 10 extra minutes and we have to pay them?
Well, we should be paying them now if they're staying for 10 extra minutes. That's what the law requires.
Okay. So there's a possibility if everyone adds up their time that they may be staying for more than 8 hours, and therefore we're going to be paying out more in wages.
We shouldn't be, because the department head should stop that. But yes, that is,
Okay.
we have that risk under wage and hour law now. But at least we would have a record of it, so somebody could take a measure to try to prevent those types of things from happening, if that's the case.
So the department head will then be forced, possibly at that time, to start throwing people out of town hall saying, we can't afford you to be here, you got to go right now.
Well, Mr. Walsh, I just think that this is a system that most municipalities have in place so that the administration and department heads can keep track of employee time. And obviously there's a lot of reasons to have it. It's a standard really in municipalities. So for example, if you have an employee who repeatedly shows up late every single day, you know, you have a tracking of this, and this allows the town to manage its employees and vacation time and all of the other stuff and personal time and sick time. And, you know, it's a lot of work, but this is something that's the industry standard, according to Mr. Hazelkamp, and municipalities use this, and we should be using it too.
Okay. Sometimes these systems, though, are it's like live by the sword and die by the sword.
Yeah.
They all seem great until all of a sudden there's 4 extra hours on someone's check the next week, and you add that up with 400 employees, give and takes here and there, and you just don't know what you're going to find. But I just hadn't heard about the system. I was really asking for it because I presumed it was in effect since it was talked about like a year and a half ago, and I was hoping to see what the savings had been that you had realized. But okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. Does anyone else have questions on these first 2 items that Mr. Hazelkamp reviewed, whether the HR reorganization or the IT software? Okay, I just have a quick question, Mr. Hazelkamp. On the IT software, so you explained what this year was, I think. Last year, the budget also included a significant number, and I didn't think that was the timekeeping system that Mr. Walsh referred to. What was that last year, the 51,000?
Yeah, that's the time. There's 3 pieces of software under this budget. One is new, and the other 2, the most significant one is the applicant tracking system that we have. So when I first got here, we hadn't installed the applicant tracking system. So the applicant tracking system is the vast majority of that. And I believe.
When you say of that, of what? I'm trying to
Yeah,
understand, what was in the 22 budget? What's the 51,000? What system was that budgeted for versus what's this year?
That's 2 pieces of software. One is about $4,000, and whatever the balance is, like they're doing without a calculator, the balance is the applicant tracking system.
So the applicant tracking system was in the 22 budget.
I believe it was actually in the budget before I got here. I think it's been it was in the budget. They hadn't installed it yet. And then I installed it when I got here.
Okay, so what's the 51,000 then for last year? What system was in last year's budget and has it been implemented?
I think that's the applicant tracking software.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you just said it was before you got here, so.
Well, yeah, I've been here for 2 years, so.
Okay, so the applicant tracking software was the 51,000 and that's been implemented at this point?
Yes. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, and then, all right, and the reason I'm asking obviously is that, you know, the budget in last year was significantly higher than the year before. So that was to reflect that new system. And then the 71,000 for this year is the one that you broadly referred to as tracking policies and accountability, et cetera.
Yeah, I describe it as a policy management software system. You know, the police department had it, and then they were the ones that sort of explained it to me. So once I saw what it did, that's when we decided it would be incredibly beneficial for the town. So.
Okay, and just curious, how far along so with this budget, is there a particular product you have in mind already?
Well, yeah, it would be the expansion of the police department. We'd use the same software as the police department.
What is that software?
It's called Power DMS, I believe is what it's called.
Okay. Power DMS, interesting. Never heard of it. Okay.
Yeah, so I hadn't either. So it's interesting because when I did the software demonstration with the salespeople, it started in almost exclusively in police departments across the country. As a way for them to track all their policy manuals and general orders and all that stuff. And then towns started to realize that it was pretty neat to use for its purpose. So it started expanding to the rest of the municipality.
So this tracks compliance with?
It does a whole bunch of things. It tracks, like, I'll take sexual harassment policy as a good example, right? So right now, the process for us to get people to sign off on it and get it back it's grueling. And then if we make revisions to it, it's even more grueling because somebody has to track it all. This system actually pushes it out and it pushes it out to their phone, or they can log in on their PC. and it sends them reminders when they have not signed off on the policy. And then I have a record that they've signed off on the policy. I also have a record when we revise the policy. So it tracks the different versions of all the policies as they go out. It tracks that people have signed off on all the policies as they go out, which is just not done right now at all. We do it when we hire them, but there has been virtually no exercise to ensure compliance as we're going along. So.
Okay, no, thank you for that. That's, the ex-auditor in me likes that one a lot. So, hopefully we get it done next year. Thank you. Does anyone else have questions on those sections of the budget? And if not, Mr. Hazelkamp, if there's anything else you want to say about HR operations? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Walsh has his hand up.
Two quick questions, Mr. Hazelkamp. Maybe you've reviewed one, but my budget book, I think I moved things around, was out of order, so it took me a while to find your page.
Sure.
But under part-time payroll, went up by 175%. What is that part of the change in the department?
Yeah, so right now I have a part-time admin.
Yep.
That's being replaced by the
Gotcha.
affirmative office, the recruitment specialist / affirmative action officer. So it's really a part-time professional position as
Sure.
opposed to right now it's a part-time clerical.
Gotcha. I understand. Okay, next, it's not a lot of money, but we've been asking this to a lot of the departments, so we just want to get, an answer. The travel and meetings line went up by 333% from 600 to 2,600. Is there something new that's come up that's going to be an extra $2,000?
I think that was actually maybe more that where it got charged. So there was 6 under educational membership. It may just be a charge issue, but since I've been here, I go to one annual conference that costs roughly $2,000. So I think it should have been allocated across 2 line items, but that's what the amount's for.
Okay. I just don't see anything else coming down, like moving from one line to another. So,
yeah.
All right.
Also, if I could just jump in, we put some of that money in there too to help train the new staff that comes in, should they be approved.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Thank you, Ms. Kupchak. Mr. Hazelkamp, anything else you want to run through on the HR operations budget?
I don't think so. The next, we might as well move to.
Yeah, let me just double check. Does anyone on the board have any questions on any other line items of this budget? Mr. Curley?
Yeah, below the operations section in the insurance and claims section, I had a couple of questions.
Oh, sorry, I should have clarified. On operations, we'll let Mr. Hazelkamp walk through those first.
That's fine.
So are we set on operations? We are not. Mr. Walsh, go ahead.
This new, the assistant director, Mr. Hazelkamp, is that are you looking to get somebody new in here for the 110,000? Or are you looking to get somebody more experienced in for that position? I mean, what are you really looking for? Are you looking for somebody with a lot of experience? And I presume you must have thought about that when you put this salary level in there. I'm just not sure what you're really looking at.
So I'll tell you what the gaps are in the department. I think it would take over risk management. It would be responsible for the employee relations function and HR compliance. It really depends on who they hire as the director and who they hire as the assistant director. So if you hired somebody as the director that doesn't have a lot of labor relations experience, for example, then you might want to hire an assistant director that had some labor relations experience. So that process is ongoing right now, so that there'll be some assessment about the quality of the candidate that they want for the assistant director.
Well, you're the director right now, right?
I have announced that I am leaving, if nobody has known that yet, but yes, I am leaving the city. So.
Okay, well, congratulations and thanks for your service. Anyway, okay, no, that makes sense, I guess. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Okay, Mr. Hazelkamp, do you want to move on?
I will. And we have Rob O'Connor from Assured Partners here. And I only mention him because he's the one that put these numbers together and I did not. So just in summary, basically, this is all of the town's different types of insurance. This is flood insurance. This is all of the different variety of insurances that the town carries for a whole bunch of different reasons. And the numbers come from them. There was a slight increase, as you can see. I know there was a lot of issues. Maybe it's on the next page. I think it's on the next page. It goes across 2 pages, just so we're on. There was a larger increase in the liability insurance. I know there was a big challenge with cyber insurance that we had, where there was a very, very large increase in our cyber liabilities insurance, and that required us to take some remedial measures internally, but the actual premium also went up pretty significantly. So those 3 line items, the first 3 line items there, are really related to the premiums that we get charged. We have Assured Partners who basically helps us, or does the work of bidding out the different policies as they come due. They look in the marketplace. We have a variety of vendors that are under this umbrella. Kerma carries our liability coverage, and we carry a deductible of $100,000 for the liability coverages. So we're on the hook for the bottom half of that. And that's kind of what I have to say. I know Rob, is Rob on the call?
He is. Mr. O'Connor, do you want to speak to this? I think you're muted at the moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so Rob O'Connor with Assured Partners. As Jim said, we handle the pretty much, a lot of the risk management function for the town. We don't get involved in the workers' comp at least at this point, but place, all of the other coverages. So as Jim said, Kerma is the currently writes the general liability, the casualty lines, and the property. And the budget that you're looking at right now reflects a 5% increase, which is, we're on what they call a rate stabilization program with Kerma, which basically caps the increase at 5%. And so we're using that in the budget right now. What we typically do is with the market right now, premiums have been going up. So what we typically have done and we're budgeting is to go in with the highest cap. So 5% is the cap level. And then we hope to, negotiate something with Kerma that's less than that. And as Jim said, the cyber, the areas that we've seen increases and that we're showing sort of projecting at least, higher increases in are certainly cyber liability. We saw a big increase in that last year, and that marketplace continues to be quite difficult. So I think we currently have a 13% increase listed for cyber. Flood insurance is another area where we're seeing some increases. So I think we've allocated about a 10% increase there. And also on the part of the excess liability is also where we've shown some increases, or we're projecting an increase. But again, at this point, the renewal is not finalized. We don't have final numbers, so these are really our best guesstimates for what's going to happen as of 7/1.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, the comments you just made, that's just referring to the liability insurance line item here, correct?
Correct.
$1,208,522 in the, okay. All right. Questions from the board? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris DeWitt. I don't know who to ask this question. How did we get out of paying for interscholastic sports insurance this year?
I think I'll speak to it and then Rob can sort of describe it. There was an analysis done where we've had this policy in place for a long time. The premium was what it is. It's listed as 70, I think 70 last year. There was a review of an actual claims paid over the last 4 or 5 years, which was significantly less than the premiums that we were paying. So there was a decision that, why are we carrying this coverage when if we had to pay it, we could do it on a self-insured basis, given the scope of the claims. I think, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but last year, and I don't know if Rob knows it off the top of his head, but we paid, I think Pat said, I don't know, it's $10,000 on the $70,000 premium. It was pretty, and I think that had trended that way. So there was a policy decision that we would not carry it for that reason.
And just to clarify, the costs were shifted to the Board of Education for this coverage.
So we still have the insurance, or because it does make sense if we have a substantial, if we have 5 years of information that says we had $10,000 worth of claims and we don't want to pay $60,000 a year, I'm on board. But if we're taking the $70,000 and sending it over to the Board of Ed and we still only have 10,000, then that's a problem, right? So I'm curious which it is.
It is in their budget now. It's in the Board of Ed budget now.
We didn't discontinue the policy, we just shifted it to the Board of Ed?
Shifted cost.
Shifted the cost of the policy or shifted the estimate of the claims that will be self-insured?
My understanding is we shifted the cost of the policy. Yeah.
Okay, so that's part of that $300,000 or so of stuff that was taken out of the town budget and moved to the Board of Ed, crossing guards and et cetera. That's part of that number?
That's right.
And Madam Chair, if I could just say that the reason why it was shifted to them because the Board of Ed had requested that policy be kept, so that was their decision to keep it.
Got it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just one other thing, Madam Chair, on the I think the question that you asked of Rob, because he doesn't have access to a budget book, but you asked him about the liability insurance. He also does the first two items, the property and errors and omissions, are also under his umbrella.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. I appreciate that. I think, okay, so that, but the comments related to cyber liability, flood, excess liability, Mr. Schmidt, those are part of that liability insurance line, 55240?
Specifically, I believe those are under liability insurance.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out which line item the comment's related to. So that's what I'm assuming, but all right, thank you for that.
Yes.
Mr. Curley.
Yeah, real quickly, this is a question for Jared. Going back to the interscholastic 70,000. I think this is just a reporting issue. We want to make sure we don't have a roll-up problem, but in the column for department request as compared to the column for select women's proposed, they're showing the $70,000 going to zero, but if you move down onto page 71 of the budget book, the totals for insurance and claims and the total overall in those two columns don't change. So that $70,000 is either in or not, but it's inconsistent in its reporting. Just want to make sure that that's not double counted or left out inadvertently.
Yeah, just a formula error. I'll take a look at it. Yeah, I'm told it's just a clerical or formula error.
Okay, so could you let us know if that affects the roll-up or if it's just a footing error on this page, please?
We will.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Curley. Mr. Walsh.
Connor, do you supply the Board of Ed now with that scholastic policy, interscholastic sports insurance?
Yeah, that's, no, we do not. That's the one policy that we're not involved with. It's placed through another agency. So unfortunately, I don't have access to any of that. I've had discussions with, with Jim and others about the, the policy in general, but we do not actually control that.
Chairwoman, can we get somebody from the Board of Ed to explain why they're using a policy, spending possibly $70,000, since Mr. O'Connor doesn't do it anymore? I don't know what they're paying when there's like a $10,000 a year claim. I'd like to get an answer to that.
Certainly, Mr. Schmidt, can you make note of that for follow-up with the Board of Ed?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Connor, on all the insurances that you supply, have any of the limits of the insurances changed in any way from last year to this year, other than the interscholastic sports insurance?
Yes. So the one big change was last year on the cyber liability. We had a very difficult time getting coverage in place, and the decision was made at the time by the risk manager to go from a 5 million limit down to a 3 million limit on the cyber, in order to take advantage of cost savings for that. So yes, that was one big change. And that was, again, done because even at the 3 million level, we were, the town was experiencing, I think it was a $20,000 or $30,000 increase in premium.
Okay. Was the trouble in getting the insurance that we just couldn't find a market for it, or was it because on the cyber, they wanted us to make changes in our IT equipment or IT software that we did not want to do?
The biggest reason was getting what's called MFA, multi-factor authentication, in place town-wide. So we were working with both the town on the town side and the Board of Ed side to get multi-factor authentication installed throughout, because that's become something that all the cyber markets basically have required, along with a number of other things, endpoint detection and other things. So there's the cyber market, if you listen to the news and you hear what's going on, you can understand cyber claims have grown exponentially. Every single insurance company in the cyber market now is requiring, I spend a lot of time on cyber these days, trying to sort through, help clients figure out what they need to do to get the coverage. So the town was no different. And quite honestly, it took a lot of time to get that done. And we finally did get it done. And, even with that done, we were looking at, a significant increase in premium. We've already started, Jim and I talked to Jim about this, and we're in the midst of working on getting quotes now for the 7/1 renewal, because we wanted to get an early start on it. And, that's something we're already working on.
Okay. Do you think the $3 million coverage is enough for a town the size that we are and what we do?
It's always difficult to answer that question. I guess my answer to that would be I liked it better when it was 5. But obviously it's a dollar decision. And again, this year we'll look at getting quotes for 5 and 3, and the town's going to have to decide if the extra, additional dollars are worth it.
Okay. What does the cyber policy cover? Like, just explain to our board what it covers.
The biggest thing for municipalities that we've seen across the country has been ransomware. And so that's a big area, but that's just one segment of it. It covers, breach, any kind of a breach, which can be significant and costly. It covers, a number of things without getting into all the various coverages. It's fairly complicated, but it's a fairly complicated policy that the coverage is very comprehensive. You know, but ransomware and breaches are the things that we see most commonly, you know, causing problems for towns.
Does it cover, I mean, we have a number of departments that take credit cards. Okay.
It would cover as well. Yep.
It would cover credit card claims that they were able to get into our system, steal our customers, our taxpayers' credit card numbers, use them, letting them know, getting them credit services, all of that?
All of that is included depending on the type of claim. You know, there's what you're getting into sort of cyber crime, which is another part of the policy. And typically that's, you know, sub-limited. So the coverage limits are going to be lower for those sorts of things. But typically those claim amounts are lower. I think the town currently has $250,000 for cybercrime claims, for example, as opposed to $3 million. So, you know, but, you know, when you look at those types of claims and we see those claims, they typically are, you know, smaller numbers. So as opposed to ransomware, where you can easily get into, you know, millions, multiples of millions.
Yeah, but if somebody was able to get into our system and steal our customers' credit cards, which we have lots of people, especially with Parks and Recreation. We have kids all over this town. I mean, we have 10,000 kids in the school system. So there's programs all over the place. And we had to pay for all of the money for some of those claims, including, you know, credit services and all. That's going to be a lot of it. It's going to be more than $250,000.
Yeah, you know, the thing I will say is that the credit cards haven't been the problem because the credit card companies typically are covering a lot of that. So quite honestly, that has not been the issue. You know, we haven't seen those sorts of claims be that because the credit card companies have taken the bulk of that. You know, if it's fraud, they'll typically, as you may know, with your own credit card, you know, the credit card companies will cover fraud. So if you can tell them it's fraud, they're going to pick that up. So the insurance companies are not, you know, covering those claims, you know, typically.
Okay. I mean, I'm with a business that's a lot smaller than the town of Fairfield, and we have a lot higher liability limits on this. But you're our expert, so we'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Testani?
Thank you. I just have some questions to sort of correspond to what Mr. Walsh's line of questioning was, and it's a theme, Madam Chair, that we were talking about the other night with regard to cybersecurity. So let me ask, because I've asked this in other situations, the concern that's been well publicized is what's been happening with the Ukraine and with Russia and the potential for infiltration, for lack of a better word, into different cybersecurity systems. So, I mean, there's been malware talked about, ransomware, there's been Trojan horses talked about. So is there a concern that Mr. Walsh alluded to it, there's not enough coverage? Are other municipalities increasing their coverage now because of the recent threats of cybersecurity? And I know I spoke to Dave, our IT person, the other night, and he seemed pretty confident with regard to what we have already established in the town. But to be honest, I do have some concerns about it.
So, Madam Chairwoman, if I could just mention, my understanding is that those credit card numbers are not stored by the town, and Dave Kelly can chime in on that. We don't keep them, we don't store them. They're run through to the credit card company, and the credit card company pays us. So, and as Dave mentioned the other night, Mr. Testani, when you asked him, you know, feel free to give him a call and he can explain a little bit more detail offline about the security measures that we do have in place, and we do have them in place to protect the town infrastructure, and cybersecurity.
Okay, I was just curious about, in terms of the insurance piece of it, if we've considered increasing it because of the latest threats. That's all. I just had some concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Testani, and I'll be honest, and appreciating everything that Mr. Kelly said. You know, the most sophisticated organizations in the world get hacked. And, you know, if somebody
That's my
really wants to
concern,
get into
right.
your system, they can. I guarantee you that we could never have enough security to prevent that. I guess the question is, and others have alluded to this, you know, is there a threat to municipalities? Are municipalities being targeted, and how? I think I heard ransomware. You know, I'm not so worried about credit cards. It's more an issue of ransomware shutting down the town operations, shutting down all our computer systems.
Malware, yeah.
Yeah, an interest in understanding, is that a risk that, you know, is actually impacting towns, or are the targets generally more corporations or larger entities?
Do you have any info on that, Robert, on what the Madam Chair was?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So here's what I'll say. In the past year, the town is in a much better position, and you know, Dave Kelly and Nancy Byrne, I mean, they know that because you know, I was sort of in their grid for about 6 months, sort of, you know, telling them what they needed to do in order to get, you know, and the cyber market and the insurance company was pushing to get things done. And because of that, there were a lot of things done that, you know, the town had to do that to improve their cyber security. So, you know, multi-factor authentication being the biggest. I mean, that the MFA, multi-factor authentication, is probably, you know, 80 to 90% of the, you know, reason that towns are getting ransomware claims. So getting MFA in place, which was done, took about 6 months to get it done, but we got it done this past year, was huge. And you know, there were a number of other things, endpoint systems. I mean, there was a lot of work done because we had to get it done in order to get cyber liability over the past year. So the town's in a much better position now. The other thing that happened was we went from 5 million in coverage to 3 million, and that, in my opinion, you know, I wouldn't say that was a good thing. That was a decision that was made by the former risk manager, you know, because budgetary concerns. I would revisit that and personally, you know, consider going back to 5, given, you know, all of the things that we just talked about. You know, municipalities are a target. I mean, if you pay attention to what's going on with cyber, you know, the city of Atlanta, you know, $9-10 million claims. You know, down in Houston, in Texas, there were a number of cities that were hit, and they shut the city down for days, weeks. You know, that's, you know, very expensive claims. So, you know, I would say,
what is
that,
Mr. O'Connor, what is in relative terms, the difference between 3 million and 5 million of coverage? I mean, I don't want to belabor this, but what are we talking about?
I want to say it was $30,000 off the top of my head. I could go back and look, but you know, off the top of my head, I remember you know, a budget number of somewhere in the $30,000 to $50,000 range.
Okay, thank you for that. Other questions from the board on this subject? Okay. All right. Any other questions on this? We still have risk management, which is a separate topic, but on insurance and claims exclusive of risk management? Okay. Seeing none. All right. Well, Mr. O'Connor, thank you very much for being here with us tonight. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you again soon. Next year, probably.
Thanks for your input.
Yeah, thanks. Yep. Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to move on to the risk management line item, which is, this is again on page 71 of the budget, and it's the last line item under insurance and claims. And I think Mr. Schmidt and Attorney Baldwin are here. Mr. Schmidt, do you want to kick this off?
Can I ask a quick question?
Who was that?
I'm sorry, it's Jim Hazelcamp.
Oh,
Are we
sure.
gonna go back, are we gonna go back to the workers' comp line item? Because there's somebody on the call and I just want to make sure that if we're not gonna, are we gonna go to workers' comp after that?
Yeah, I was actually just going in order of the budget.
okay.
So we
Sure,
can
great.
certainly go to workers' comp now if you prefer that, but is that easier since we have someone on the call?
I believe Mr. Roach is on.
Yeah, I didn't, on my agenda, I didn't have it noted that anyone was joining us on workers' comp, but if we have someone here, then let's do that first. Who is it that's with us?
Dan Roach from PMA Companies, Client Service Manager for the Town of Fairfield and Fairfield Board of Ed.
Okay, thank you. All right, why don't we switch to workers' comp then? Do you want to, I didn't see any backup for this item other than the budget book. So why don't you just go ahead and take us through it?
So these are the figures that are there. We have our claims handling service. That's for the day-to-day claims operations that we do, or the claims adjusting that we do. It's the 100,900. That's been a flat fee for over a number of years. Same thing with the loss control. Loss control is training for bloodborne pathogens, hazardous communications, OSHA compliance. Those are the type of the activities that are covered under that portion of the budget. The next figure is the combination of the workers' comp liabilities for the upcoming year, the claims that are going to be for on the town side for workers' comp and the Board of Ed side for workers' comp. And that's about it. And then the last piece of it is the heart and hypertension, which is actually, we calculate that on a 4-year average. So the workers' comp piece is actually a projection for the claims that are going to rise in 22, 23. And the heart and hypertension figure is a number for all claims for all years coming up in the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay, questions from the board on this item? Mr. Walsh?
Hello, this is Jim Walsh. How are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
Good. So our workers' comp claims area seems to have gone down, say from fiscal year 19 to this proposed year by about 28%. Are premiums going down, or are we just becoming that safe of a employer to work at that we're not?
Well, you're self-insured, so it's not really premiums, it's just actual expenditures that we're talking about there. So I think probably COVID over the last couple of years has had something to do with that, with some of the reductions, just the activity, the claim activity.
But even in fiscal year 19, which was pre-COVID, we're at 2 million, just slightly over 2 million, almost 2,000,001. Now we're down to slightly under 1.5 million. So, trying to compare apples to apples, taking COVID out. Our just claims are just down, or do you think that the fiscal year 23 number is going to has some type of COVID effect attached to it?
I'm not certain about that, to be honest with you, sir.
Yeah, because you make a good point about the COVID years, and maybe, some employees were just working from home and stuff like that, but it seems to be like everyone's back and we're still even going lower than the COVID years.
So we do, I think we have one of the things we do regular claim reviews with Jim and the legal staff. I think we're very aggressive in managing the claims and trying to get people returned to work or separated from the town if they have permanent restrictions. I think the claims handling is helping things along here. So we've got a very steady adjuster on the file, and we work closely with Jim's office to try to get these people back to work as quick as possible.
It's great. We should have brought Jim in earlier, back in fiscal year 19.
I'm not taking any credit for that at all.
Okay. All right. And then on the heart and hypertension, this will kind of, based on the laws, right? I think they're federal laws, will eventually go away, correct? Because the population of people who qualify for it is kind of set. Is that correct?
That's true. To an extent, I did check with Jim's office before the meeting, and believe it or not, you actually have 28 police and fire personnel that are hired before July 1st, 1996, which means they're eligible to file claims under the Heart and Hypertension Act. So that's a kind of an interesting number. I came from the city of New Haven. I don't think there's too many employees in police or fire sworn personnel close to that number that were hired before 1996. I mean, New Haven's got a little bit different situation. You can retire after 20 years at 50% of your pay. So there's some incentives to leave there. So I was kind of surprised that there was, that's a fairly sizable number of people that are still under the old law. But eventually they will all, when those folks retire, that will eliminate the potential for new claims.
Have there been a lot of new claims in the last year? Any new claims in the last year?
I took a look at the last 5 years, and there's been 5 heart and hypertension claims filed in the last 5 years. And I think out of the 5, there's been a total of 150. There's 150,000 incurred, which is reserved and paid on those claims, with about 75,000 actually paid for those 5 claims, principally 2 claims.
I mean, I think one of the reasons this drags on, and Dan can speak to this, there's widow benefits that.
Yes, yeah, that's a big part of it.
So even when a person who was filed the claim originally passes on, there's a continuation of benefits to the widow, which is why this liability, I appreciate that Jim wants it to go away, and I think everybody would. It's a long tail because of some of the widow benefits that are guaranteed under the statute.
Right.
I guess I'm not, I want it to go away when it goes away, but I guess, will we be expecting to see this number go down? But I guess we don't know, because we don't know what new claims will be coming in for the people that are eligible, correct?
Right, and there's also a little bit of volatility associated with the non-widows that, as they get older, they've got heart conditions. There's always the potential for, surgical procedures and,
Sure.
Increased medication. So it's probably going to take a while for that to wind down.
Okay. Have we done any analysis, like from what we budget to what the claims have been? Are we pretty accurate with this number as we go? Or?
I think we've been fairly close. I mean, there's been some years where we've had settlements or some unexpected costs where it might have been a little bit over the budget amount, but I think we've been pretty close here. This is the number that's there is a 4-year average.
I have no further questions, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Other questions on this? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, I think what we're going to do here, just given the topic, I had been about to move on to risk management, but I think some of that is likely to spill over into our executive session. So why don't we save that and go to unemployment compensation, followed by legal and contingency, and then we'll go to risk management. So unemployment compensation, Mr. Schmidt, do you want to handle that one?
Sure, I'll go into this. So there's a lot of moving parts to unemployment. There kind of always are, and it's not very predictable, but especially this year, trying to find a good number to base a projection on for next year's budget is difficult because there are federal credits that have helped us to pay for our unemployment costs over the past, well, since pretty much since COVID started. And those credits went away, and there were different types of credits. One expired, I believe it was the end of September, and another 2021, and the other one expired at the end of the year, at the end of the calendar year, after December 2021.
Mr. Schmidt,
So
Mr. Schmidt, I apologize. I probably should have directed everyone to the page. So unemployment compensation, it's in the finance section of the budget, and it's on page 138. Sorry about that, Jared. Go ahead.
That's okay. So we did, the original proposal was for $350,000. And after going through the budget with the Board of Selectmen, we took another look at it, went back and looked at, you know, what we've laid out so far this year. And we ended up reducing that amount to $250,000. We reduced it by $100,000. So if any of you have the changes document in front of you, that's there was that reduction that was made for the Board of Selectmen. So that's where the proposal right now stands at $250,000.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the board on this item? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. So why don't we move on to legal services then, which is Department 1270, and flip back to page 61 of the budget book. And I assume Attorney Baldwin will take us through this item.
Certainly. Good evening, everyone. It's, I think, pretty self-explanatory in terms of the numbers that you see before you. The increases have a lot to do with the increased number of tax appeals in particular. I think that's the primary driving force behind the increases. This is also an inexact science when coming up with these figures. So it's always a moving target, but we think that this is an accurate representation of the future legal exposures in this area of the legal ledger. Because, you know, as you know, there are other areas where legal costs are incurred, but they are not applied necessarily to this budget. The fill pile is a good example, as well as others. Certainly the risk management side, you know, the liabilities that are covered by our KERMA and PMA for workers' comp and KERMA for the liability claims, those legal costs are also set forth and included in those budgets, those liabilities, and not in this budget. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Mr. Testani. Thank you, Attorney Baldwin. Mr. Testani?
Hey. Good evening, Jim. How are you? It's good to see you.
Good evening.
Just have a quick question on, I'm just trying to understand, and I may have asked this last year, so I apologize ahead of time. But line number 53200, fees and professional services. So fiscal year 20 actual was 299, so let's just say 300, right? Fiscal year 21 actual was close to double, 543,794. The budget, fiscal year 22 budget, 685, and now it's 707. So I'm just helping to understand what's in that line. What does that consist of? I mean, I understand you have to pay fees and that kind of thing. I just trying to understand a little bit of the history and why it's increased seemingly exponentially since fiscal year 20.
I think that it's just the amount of extra legal work that's been done, and maybe it's a tale of you get what you pay for sometimes. We have the fill pile debacle, which has consumed a great deal of time and cost. That's just one item, as well as many others. On the smaller side of things, but it adds up, is things like contract reviews, which I don't think were very were reviewed as robustly as we are in this administration, and you could say the same perhaps about other areas that fall under the legal department.
Okay, so it's not necessarily fees for like memberships or going to meetings, or it's sort of an all-encompassing line. Would that be fair to say that it includes, in addition to whatever fees you may have yourself as an attorney and whatever other attorneys we contract out with, their fees are included in that as well? Is that fair to say?
There are fees, but not for going to something or being a member of the Connecticut Bar Association or anything along those lines. If that's what you're getting at, definitely not included.
Okay, so I guess I'm asking, where is that? Like, how do you account for that? I'm sure it's not a big number, but I'm just curious.
Well, these are professional services, and I am, in a sense, just like the outside counsel, billing the town by an hourly rate, and I do not include my memberships in professional organizations and thrust it onto the town, because that is just one. The town is a client of mine, but I don't expect the client to pay for those fees directly. And the same.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and the same can be said for the other professionals who provide legal services to the town.
Right. Okay, that's what I'm asking.
I will qualify.
Now.
Yeah, I will qualify that and say that, for example, I am given access to the town's land records and that sort of thing at no cost, but that's to be expected, I would think, for the town attorney.
Right. I'm just curious, Jim, who do we contract out with now, and has that changed, or do you anticipate it changing?
Well, as I've said before, I like to consider myself like a general practitioner or a primary care physician. In that role, the first line of legal defense, or taking a view at legal matters. And when you have to seek expertise, I go out to other counsel and we get agreements with them, retainer agreements. Attorney Mednick is a good example, who's doing the Charter Review Commission. He's excellent. I couldn't hold a candle to what he's accomplished in doing with that commission. We go out to outside labor firms like Bircham, Moses, and Devlin. We use Cohen and Wolf, Jontos and Lottie, Bob Lottie in particular. Marino, Zabel, and Schellenberg is doing almost all the tax appeals and is doing a great deal of work with conservation issues. I've used Attorney Ambrose for real estate matters, as well as Attorney Clamero, and Rose Caller is another firm that has been used historically, and they're very good for liability claims that are not covered by our insurances.
And would you say the amount of work that you, for lack of a better word, delegated to these other firms has remained constant? Has it changed? Has it increased? And do you expect to add more, other than the attorney you mentioned at the beginning for the charter revision? Have we added more? Have you decided to add more outside attorneys beyond what we've already used, let's say, this past year?
Yeah, I think the answer is it's on a case-by-case basis as to who you need, who you should go to. So it's difficult to answer that. I can tell you that, hopefully the tax appeals will eventually dissipate. So those will not be as It won't be as large a line item, but that's probably not the case for this coming fiscal year. We have.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, we have some interesting transactions that are on the horizon that I should probably not address right now that may require, again, additional legal services outside my expertise. And so things like that come along all the time, but it's on a case by case basis. It's not based on the firm by any means.
Right, now I understand. And just one last question along this line, because you mentioned it, the fill pile, obviously that's a big, you know, albatross around the town, especially the legal fees. Do you anticipate anything, you know, continued legal wrangling over the next year for that situation, or do you think, is there and again, this may have to go into executive session, but I'm just trying to get an idea if you anticipate continued legal fees just for that one issue.
Absolutely, yes. And we'll probably go into it when we discuss matters in executive session into some detail.
Right, I figured. Okay, thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Good to see you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Testani. I just, Mr. Attorney Baldwin, if I could just sort of a follow-up question to Mr. Testani, but maybe big picture. And you do have on page 61 the general categories of litigation here that your budget relates to. And I guess, and maybe this is what Mr. Testani was trying to get to, you know, trying to look at the trend of 300 to 350,000 a couple of years ago to 700,000 this year. Assuming that last year also had fees in it related to tax appeals, you know, even if you take out tax appeals and you take out charter, we're still substantially higher this year. So I'm assuming that's related to the litigation and the labor line items. Is there anything that we can talk to in that regard now, or should we wait for executive session?
Yeah, it's probably best for executive session, I think. All I can tell you is that the workload is there and it's significant, and it will cost the town ultimately more money if you don't invest in good legal services. And I'm not speaking about myself necessarily. I'm talking about outside counsel. You know, in the long run, it can cost you more, as Mr. Mottola well knows.
Okay, all right, and we can follow up on that in executive session. I just wanted to clarify. Mr. Walsh, you had a question? Thank you for that, Mr. Baldwin.
You're welcome. I'm happy to answer this question. You're on mute, Jim. Jim, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thanks for, thanks. Oh, really? I can make it now. Thanks for breaking this out by the appropriation by category. I think it's very helpful to see. I've asked predecessors of yours to do the same, and they were never able to do it. They were never able to give you a budget like how much you spend in certain areas. So I appreciate you breaking it out by category. And one of the categories that Ms. Charlton just asked for, I think most of the board should know, except for our newer members, Mr. Curley and Mr. Stark, is just that area of employee labor. Because prior to you, we had Emmett Hibson here, who was doing a lot of the negotiations, but also getting paid for that because he was a labor attorney. So he was getting an extra $50,000. That's why he was getting paid like $180,000 or $190,000, was because he was doing a lot of the negotiations, I guess, himself. So some of that money is actually, the program changed with the change of the administration and Mr. Hibson no longer being an employee of the town of Fairfield. So, you had decided to send that out to more better expertise in other areas, as you kind of mentioned, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think that's a good thing. So I just want people to remember, because at the same time, the salary level went down in the HR department by I don't know what the difference is with their base salaries prior to the $50,000 stipend he got for doing some of this employment stuff, but it also went down there. So there are some savings that we kind of know about as a board from doing past budgets. So I just wanted to point that out. Other than that, I don't have any further questions, Mr. Baldwin. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you for that reminder, Mr. Walsh. I had actually forgotten. I knew that, but I had forgotten about it. So thank you for raising that. Okay, any other questions on this item? Okay. All right, seeing none, let's go back to, let's see, I'm sort of losing my place here because we're all out of order. So we're going to go back to risk management, which is part of the HR budget. And that is, let's see, page 72, I believe. And I know that, so Mr. Schmidt, you can take us through this. I assume we're going to talk about some of this in executive session, but maybe it's just helpful to talk to the board about how this account works and how it interfaces with the internal service fund and sort of how we for the money that's budgeted here. That might be helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Caitlin's gonna walk through the internal service fund. There is more detailed information with regard to risk management that gets into cases that we'll talk about in executive session, but Caitlin can talk about the accounting and financing of risk management, workers' comp, and our medical insurance.
Okay, thank you. All right, welcome, Ms. Blassie. Good to see you.
Hi. So as you guys, we talked about the internal service fund a bit. So this $850 in the risk management fund claims under the HR budget basically gets swept. So that comes into revenue into the internal service fund. The internal service fund now consists of basically two columns. You only see one column in the annual report, but it's risk management, which is $850 flows into, and it's the town active medical. So those two columns, so to speak, I think something was sent out today that kind of shows the actual 21 that was in the annual report for the fiscal year ended 21, showing a fund balance of about almost $6 million, which the town has worked very hard to kind of grow that balance because it was in a negative situation for many years. So the two columns are basically the risk management, which this $850, this flowing of the risk management fund flows in as revenue, as does the transfer of the workers' comp claims that we just spoke to a bit ago of about in this fiscal year, it'll be the 1468. In fiscal 21, it was slightly, in the fiscal, 21, it was 1641. We're currently in 22. So I think you guys have the actual June 21 internal service fund flow, and I could go through that sheet if you want. I don't know what it was entitled. It was sent up today, Jared, in terms of the backup.
We'll share that.
Okay, we can share our screen.
Yeah, it's page 69 of our backup.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. DeWitt.
So we're going to get it up on the screen so everyone can kind of see what we're talking about. Okay, yep. So here it is. This is the actual fiscal 21 sheet. As you can see, I'm going to talk left to right. The risk management column has total revenues of that 2447, which is essentially the risk management piece coming in and the workers' comp piece. And there's a slight difference, as you're going to notice, is the WPCA also funds a piece of the workers' comp as well. Those are the actual claims for the workers' comp, general liability, and town property. So as you could see, there was actually a net profit in fiscal 21 for the risk management column, so to speak, on that sheet. So the fund balance is still in a negative situation, but that's only due to the fact that we have an accrual of almost $12 million from the workers' comp claims, which has like a 20-year life basically on them, and the legal settlements that we've estimated going forward. The next column is the town active medical. We were in a positive situation in fiscal 21 in that our revenues came in at about 13 million and our expenses were about of the 11.7. I'm just speaking in rounded terms. So we had a net profit of about 1.3 in fiscal 21 for the town active medical piece, leaving a total fund balance on an accrual basis of a positive almost $6 million there. We do have like the accrual, like I said, that 742 for the active medical is about the 1 month lag or so between going to the doctors and the claims from June and then getting paid out in July. So on the next sheet, that 5967 flows on to the projected June 22 piece. So if we could go to the next sheet. The top line is that 5967 kind of coming forward. So we're obviously currently in the fiscal 22 year. Our budgeted numbers for going back to the risk management piece is about a 2.7 million. We are obviously currently in the year. We're projecting expenditures of about 2.3. I've annualized the workers' comp and the general liability and the town property claims. Now, because due to the fact that we're self-insured, those could go up, but I'm projecting a profit there of slightly under 400,000. On the town active medical piece, we have revenues coming in that were budgeted in fiscal 2022 of the 12.6. Given Aon's projections of this year for the active medical claims, we're projecting about a $13 million number there, which is a slight loss of almost $300,000. So as you could see, and you're going to see in the 23 budget, as you heard from Carlton as well, our medical claims are starting to go up again. I think people are returning to the doctor, and in this 23 budget, I believe that number is closer now to 14 million. So the net profit, if you go to that third column for the total, if you look at the two columns combined, is about $100,000 that we're projecting to be favorable for fiscal 2022. So that 5.9 goes to, a little bit over $6 million or so. I did not touch the accruals numbers. We get those from our outside professional services at the end of June. So going on to the third sheet, that $6 million then rolls forward, and now we're into the budget 2023. Town department premiums for the risk management piece, again, are the numbers coming in from the HR budget and the WPCA budget for the risks, the 850 and the workers' comp. And the expenditures, again, because we're budgeting to be exactly what our outside consultants are telling us what it's going to be. So our net profit is clearly zero. So that's showing that we're budgeting exactly what we think our expenses are going to be for the risk management and the workers' comp and any town liability. Again, moving over to the medical claims, again, we're budgeting exactly what Aon is telling us what we think our medical claims are going to be for the year of the 14.4, given that that $6 million then would just roll forward. So that 2023 sheet just tells us that shows us that our revenues are going to equal our expense as of today. Do you guys have any questions on the internal service fund? I know it's a little bit tricky because I kind of sweep out the general fund expense budgets, and those come over into revenue into this internal service fund. So that's kind of how it works, and all the actuals then flow through that fund as opposed to the general fund. So any variation falls here and not into the general fund.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Appreciate that. So bottom line, the $6 million fund balance in internal service is projected to be roughly the same at the end of this fiscal year as it was last fiscal year. And it's the same in the projection that you've got going forward to the end of fiscal 23. Okay. I don't know, Jared or Frank, would you mind taking the screen share down for us? Okay, thank you. Mr. Curley, you have a question?
Yeah, real quickly. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for walking us through that, Caitlin. I just want to make sure I'm tying back the budget book to what you presented tonight. If I'm looking at page 71 of tonight's backup and comparing that to, coincidentally, page 71 of our budget book, the 850,000 for risk management claims, that's split into two pieces on tonight's backup, 750 for general liability and 100,000 for town property, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then a little bit further down in the budget book for total workers' comp, you see 1589690, and on tonight's backup for workers' comp, we're seeing 1538290. And I would assume that those numbers should tie out, but I'm not sure which is the appropriate number.
So on page is it 71 or 72? The workers' comp, the 58940 in the general fund under the HR department is 1468790.
Okay.
So that plus there's a workers' comp piece in the WPCA fund as well, under Fund 130, which is a self-supporting fund. Those two should make up your difference, which should get you to the 1538290.
Got it.
I think it's like 69,000 or so, 69.5 maybe, that get you then to your workers' comp claims.
See, okay, and then the other line items in workers' comp here in the budget book, the 100,000, 100.9, and the 20,000, that's not rolling through here, correct?
No, those stay in the HR budget.
Okay.
Yep.
That's helpful. And then follow-up question. I wasn't completely clear about the projected fund balance in the risk management column being negative on an accrual basis, but then with roughly a $12 million accrual gets us into the positive. Can you just walk through that a little bit more just to help me understand that?
Sure. So I did not update the accrual because we don't know until the end of June what that accrual is. That's I'm going to kind of round it up to a $12 million accrual, consists of two pieces. It's the workers' comp settlement accrual that comes from PMA, knowing who has a case in the system and what we would owe the person given their life expectancy, giving all of these type of variables that PMA factors into that. In addition to, and I think that's 9 million or so, I'm gonna round. In addition to legal reserves. So I meet with the town attorney and say, okay, what open cases do we have as of June and estimated settlements amount. So basically what that 12 million says is, if the town ceased to exist as of June 30, what were our liabilities? What are our best guesstimate as to our liabilities for risk management claims, which are workers' comp and any legal settlements? Settlements only, not legal fees, but settlements.
Yep.
That's what that $11.9 million represents. And the rest is just the math. So on the accrual basis, we're in a negative because I have to book those as a liability. So those have all been expensed.
Got it.
Okay, and so what that balance without accrual means, if I didn't have to book that $11.8 million accrual, we would be favorable. We would be showing $7.2 million.
Got it. That's helpful. Okay. All right. Last question, I hope, for me at least. You're showing on page 71 of tonight's backup that the projected fund balance here starts the year a little over $6 million, 6069 and change. It's a net zero for the year, so we end 6069 and change. I guess if I scroll back to the previous year, we ended at or started that year at 5967, so it's not a lot of roughly $100,000 gain or growth to the fund. And the year before that, we started at 4.4 million with about $1.5 million added to the fund. I understand the idea of trying to hold the fund flat year over year, but we have seen growth in that fund. Is there a target fund balance that the town feels is appropriate? Because it seems like $6 million here is high, frankly, but I just don't know the history here and what the target is, other than potentially just trying to hold it flat in year over year. But we have seen growth, so I just wanted to ask about that.
So what's happened, there's a lot of history in this fund. So I would say when I started here about 15 years ago, it was in the negative. Even the accrual basis was in a negative, and it was a large concern to the rating agencies. That was one of the first questions at every call: what's going on with your internal service fund? How are you going to beef it up? How are you going to help this fund? The fund has changed over time. 15 years ago, it was not strictly risk management town active. It was Board of Ed active, was also self-insured. We also had, back in '09 is when we switched it, retiree medical was also in this fund. And then in 2009, the Opeb trust was created. So over the past 15 years, a couple of those columns have fallen off, so to speak. The Board of Ed was self-insured. Now we went to the state plan, so it's no longer part of this internal service fund. They pay a premium every month. It's what the state tells them. It's a flat dollar amount, and they pay it regardless of their claims. So really what's left is two very volatile columns, because we're self-insured. Because we're self-insured with active medical, because we're self-insured with the workers' comp, we have deductibles to kind of help with the variability here. But you never know. You never know from 1 month to the next. As I think you guys saw, from the original medical projection to this projection, what they do is a rolling 12 months. And I think that first month that rolled off was extremely favorable. Now all of a sudden, the month that rolled on was not so much. So the medical went up a couple, 300,000, I think, was the variance for the general fund. So unfortunately, being self-insured, there's a lot of positives, but there's some variability here that you have to kind of swallow along the way as well. What the 23 sheet is showing you is that we're budgeting what our professionals are telling us what our expenses are going to be. We follow their advice. We budget what they tell us their best estimate is. Hence, the 23 budget staying at that $6 million number. The 22 page going back, because we're in there now, what you're seeing is the medical claims, is everybody going back to the doctors, was a negative $300,000. Luckily, what we're projecting so far on the risk management piece is favorability. So luckily, we're still favorable slightly by that 100. Could that swing? Absolutely, it could swing. You know, you guys just talked about workers' comp and what could go on there. We're going to talk about legal settlements, I think, pretty soon. So 100,000 is somewhat flat, in my opinion, given the large dollars flowing through this fund. 21, really, if you look at the 21 sheet, the favorability, no one went to the doctors. I think there was a lot of COVID things still happening. We have a $1.3 million favorable number on our medical. I mean, that's, I think, the largest I've ever seen. So I think a lot of that, so we went from 4.4 million to almost 6. And I think that's really the reason for that. So I think it would be silly not to budget what our professionals are telling us what our expenses are going to be. So that's where I think, and again, we have the accrual, nothing we can do about it. The workers' comp accruals, those tails are long. They're 20-year, 30-year lives on those. The accrual for the medical piece is about a 1.5 month lag. That's kind of small. It's just timing. There's not a lot you could do with that. But that's really how it's grown. The town has really taken a lot of strides over the last 15 years to really make this fund to be in a positive situation. I mean, there's a couple of board members on here who will probably talk to it as well, but it was a huge concern of the rating agencies when I was first hired.
Okay,
very-
thank you, Ms.
Yeah, thank
Fossey. Mr. Walsh?
I don't want to belabor. I think Ms. Fossey did an excellent job summarizing where we are, Mr. Curley, but this fund used to be a complete nightmare. And the fluctuations that could happen from year to year. The stopgap definitely helped, the stopgap insurance. But there was years where the town's medical claims were completely out of control. And the Board of Ed used to complain that we were using their money. And they wanted some relief on that. And then you know what happened a couple of years later? The Board of Ed's numbers went completely crazy because they have so many more insured members of their pool. And it started dragging us down. There's years where, and Mr. DeWitt was there, and Ms. Leclerc was definitely there. Mr. Mottola may have been there, where we had to make contributions to the internal service fund, fresh cash, just dumped in there because the rating agencies were getting so concerned. So to be where we are, it's like a gift. It's like, and I'll tell you, when we finally got the Board of Ed, when they went to the state system, was such a blessing in that regard to the internal service fund that we wouldn't have those huge fluctuations with the number of employees that they had. It's so nice for the last 2 or 3 years to kind of sit here with this money and not be worrying about it and not have to, I'm not the one explaining it, but the administration is. So, and then Miss Marmee was there as well. I'm sorry, Miss, didn't bring your name up, Miss Marmee. But it's just, we're self-insured and we've got to have a pool of money there in case things go the wrong way. Otherwise we have to, fund it. It's one of the reasons why when you even look at the fund balance and you may question that, like if we get to a certain number in our fund balance, it actually says one of the things we can do with the money after we go over a certain level is fund the internal service fund because, a number of us were there when we actually had to put fresh cash in there. I think it's a great spot where we are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walsh. I'm hoping we are almost ready to move into executive session, but any other questions on this item? Okay, so we're gonna move into Department 2010 contingency, which is on page 79 of the budget book. I want to note for the board and for the public, this budget was adjusted upward by the Board of Selectmen by $122,000. So the revised budget is $2,678,149. Mr. Schmidt, is there any comment you want to make on this budget while we're still in public session? On the contingency?
No, I think it's best if we go into executive session at this point.
Okay, all right. So I'll make a motion to move into executive session. Do I have a second? Mr. DeWitt? All in favor? Okay, it is unanimous. So we will move into executive session, and Fair TV, we will stop recording.
Okay, just give me a moment.
Madam Chair, while we're doing that, you said the Board of Selectmen raised contingency by how much? 120,000?
Yeah, it was 122,000 and change. 122,219. It's on the budget adjustment sheet.
Yep, got it. Thanks.
Can I, Madam Chair?
Who's speaking?
Mottola, John.
Oh, John.
Let's just give them a couple more seconds to get rolling.
Okay. Just let us know.
Oh, I'm not there, but I think it's probably safe to start now.
Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn then? All right, Mr. Mottola, Mr. Curley, all in favor? All right, see you with
Night.
donuts on Saturday. Good night.
Thank
Good night,
you.
all.